and I hope I can live up to that expectation. But I can say with great accuracy, I'm pretty sure that I can say it accurately that I used to be your age. And I would recommend that you keep the faith and keep going, regardless to what today might be in a discouraging way, because tomorrow is going to be a better day. Have that faith and that belief. That's the spirituality of life. You see, the story goes that those of you of African ancestry, and all of us are mixed, that your ancestors, those who were in Africa, did not volunteer to come to this country or leave that part of Africa. They were doing all right where they were. But the Europeans saw an opportunity to use this labor. Now ask yourself the question, and I'll give you an answer before you answer it. When you go shopping, what do you go looking for? And most of you young people would say, I'm looking for the best I can find. That's what you look for, the best you can find for the cheapest price. And that is the ancestry that all of you have that lets you be where you are. You see, in that period of time, in the 1400s and earlier, that used to be a period of time, there was a beginning of a need for cheap or no-cost labor. And the Africans, with their skills in the world of agriculture, had that talent. But most of them that they went to get had the attitude that is expressed in the old Negro spiritual: before I be your slave, I'll be dead and in my grave. That was the attitude. Your ancestors of African descent had the attitude of, I'm so glad that trouble don't last always. And so, having that attitude, they, in spite of the difficulties, you see, the slave traders, the slave people, they had guns and rifles, and those who they went to get did not have that kind of equipment. So they chose to live so that you would be here. It sounds like a joke, but that's true. Now, most of them were brought to the South as slaves, and then with the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863, they were free, but they were sharecroppers. And my mother and father, who were the children of former slaves, were sharecroppers. They did the crops, but got no shares. But they learned to read, write, and they read the Bible, where they recorded their own personal history in that Holy Bible. And some of them were men and women who were not going to take no abuse, called the lynchings. Read about that part of history. Lynchings, where if you disobeyed any kind of orders from any white person, like look at them the wrong way, you could be lynched. That means put you up in a tree with hands tied and a rope around your neck, and then they would have a picnic, like we out here now have a picnic inviting others, whites, and then blacks to see what would happen to them if they did not obey. Moving fast forward, some of those people, like my father, had skills. Though he had been a sharecropper, he went to Birmingham, Alabama to escape the sharecropping, and because he had the skills, he worked in the coal mines outside of Birmingham and later became a steel mill worker, a steel mill, Bessemer Steel, which started in England but brought that manufacturing of steel to build things to America. My father worked in one of those places, as did many. I'm just personalizing it because I knew my father better than I did almost any. But he was considered, I won't say it because too many young people here, but he was considered kind of a tough guy, which many of those men and women of that period, they weren't going to take no crap from nobody. And so they were either going to do that or leave. And so with World War I, starting in 1914, but they began to get word that they could get jobs. There was a job shortage in the big cities of the North, particularly in Chicago. And they got word that there were jobs for men, mostly men, who had skills of living in the city, like Birmingham, like Nashville, like New Orleans, like Charlotte. They had the skills of living in the city and working in plants, working in manufacturing or industrial plants, in addition to the skills they had in their working with the land. And so those people in that period, roughly from 1916 to the beginning of World War II, which is called the First Great Migration. The First Great Migration. Now, this is kind of humorous, but the story goes like this, you can believe it or not, that when I was in Birmingham, Alabama, I was born December the 7th, 1918. You can use your computer and figure that out.
18, wow.
And so the story goes that when I was 8 months old, I looked around Birmingham over that period and I said to my mama, shucks, I'm leaving here. So I brought my family to Chicago when I was 8 months old. That's not exactly, but that describes what must have been the case in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm making that humorous, but that is a fact that my family brought my brother and sister here to Chicago, in the Chicago area, when I was 8 months old. First Great Migration. Since most of them had farmland or either were working in various places, why did they flee the South? They fled for three basic reasons. One, to be able to fight back if they were attacked. That was very important. Those are the men and women who were lynched in the Old South. Two, to be able to vote. And in Chicago, that great migration, those first people elected the first black congressman after Reconstruction. His name was Oscar De Priest. He was from Florence, Alabama, where my mother was born, and she knew him. It was like her uncle or something. That was Oscar De Priest. Because they could vote, they voted the first congressional district, the first after Reconstruction. Then the third reason was to be able to send their children to get a quality education in public schools. And believe me, those of us who didn't want to go to school, we didn't have no choice. But mom and daddy were going.
Y'all was very comfortable.
Mom and daddy were going to give you a whipping if you didn't go to school and do all right. So most of the people in my generation, talk with your older relatives who may have come in that first, your grandparents or great-grandparents. They insisted, and they insisted that their relatives and friends vote, but they insisted that children, as Hillary Clinton, borrowing from African culture, said, it takes a village to raise a child. Our communities were like villages because every adult felt responsible for all the children, whether they were their children or not. And I know I was not the perfect guy. I would do something wrong. One of our neighbors would call my mama, when mama would then tell my daddy, and when daddy came home, he would say, drop your pants, boy. That means I was going to get some punishment. I wasn't angry about it because I knew I'd been caught doing wrong. I had to learn how to, if I was doing wrong, how to duck, how to keep it up. That was the period in which we controlled what Robert Abbott, the founder of the Chicago Defender, called the Black Belt. He called it the Black Belt because we were confined on the west side and the south side, but mostly on the south side because most of the blacks from the south moved to the south side where there were more opportunities and better housing. And so if a black wanted to move, he or she had to stay inside the Black Belt, which at that time was roughly from 22nd Street on the north to 35th Street on the south, from the west side of Cottage Grove on the east to what then was called the Rock Island Trail on the. We were confined to that area, but gradually, block by block, that was moved when landlords would buy property cheaper and then sell it to blacks for more money. And so, gradually, up until World War II, we moved until we were at 69th Street, still confined, but Mr. Carl Hansberry, the father of Lorraine Hansberry, had taken a case all the way to the Supreme Court because we were restricted by an agreement between landlords and landowners that they would not rent or sell to Negroes. So we were confined. Mr. Hansberry took a case to court. That was Hansberry versus Lee, and that opened up Woodlawn, northwest Woodlawn. And so we moved again. This is before World War II. And this, in that community, in that ghetto, in that Black Belt, we controlled everything. We were just overcrowded. We controlled the economics. I never worked outside the Black Belt till I went to college. Better not hire me if you had open. We would boycott your business. And so we grew up as teenagers, not making a lot of money, but we had jobs to help our family. We also controlled the politics. We would say, we put you in, you rascal, and we will take you out. So the politics were also. And then the culture. Oh boy. Blues, gospel, all of those. Jazz music, Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Oh, and went to school with Nat King Cole. I'd go home and play some of his records when I leave here. It was in the park, Washington Park. We could go and feel safe day and night. That's part of the story of the first Great Migration. Though we were segregated and though we were poor, we did not feel poverty stricken. When the Great the Great Depression came in the 1930s, where men and women were without jobs, had been up, we were in the Great Depression, but we were not depressed because we believed in the spiritual attitude, trouble don't last always. Then also because of our parents was a feeling of get on board, little children. Get on board, don't want to leave you behind. So we were in competition with one another to do well in education. And so the first Great Migration. The second Great Migration comes during and after World War II. And that migration, mostly the first Great Migration, fled the South. The second Great Migration primarily were pushed off the land because of the creation of new agricultural technology. Like, say, for example, a cotton picker, which you may hear, a cotton picker could pick more cotton in a day than 100 hand-picked. Those 99 people then had to wonder, where were they going to get food, clothes, and shelter? But they heard that there were plenty of jobs in Chicago for the unskilled. They were pushed off the land, and many of them had the education. They came and fitted into the old first Great Migration. The second migration, most of the young people had been deprived of an opportunity to go to school and get the education necessary. They've been denied that. Now that changes with the civil rights movement. And so they could not read, write, and count well. And to give you an example, I was drafted in World War II and was drafted and went to the Army. This cap has Tuskegee Airmen. Many of those guys were friends of mine. I didn't want to be up in the air. I wanted to be on the ground. But anyway, most of the young men in my unit had left their farming jobs to be able to go in the Army and make some money to send home, and also to break the segregation. I had not seen anyone in that teenage, in my growing up, I had not seen young people who could not read or write. Many of our guys in my unit, the 308 Quartermaster, could not read and write, but they could shoot. And that was important. And when we got into France, going up towards France, all those pretty German girls, French girls who didn't have any boyfriend, those young guys learned to speak French real quick. So it wasn't that they were not intelligent, they had been deprived. They were bright, but they had been deprived of the opportunities that my generation of people. And then when the war was over and Mr. Hansberry had taken another case to the Supreme Court that ruled restrictive covenants were unenforceable anywhere in the country, then people like me returning home in an already overcrowded community and having a GI Bill of Rights that we could use, we had the opportunity to move out of the old ghetto into places like South Shore, Chatham, Hyde Park, Kenwood, and all that. I could go on and on. Again, talk with your older relatives and they can tell you the story. And the new population coming without the background or skills that had been in the first Great Migration, they became isolated in that community where I grew up. They became isolated without the skills, and then the jobs began to go away for the unskilled. The schools began to not be able to teach as easily, and they began to flounder for those young men and young women. And then I know, because I was teaching at Hyde Park High School at that period, and I had in my I demanded that they had a tracking system, and when they asked me to come teach at Hyde Park, they were going to give me the privileged upper track, where my daughter and others like her could be in the upper track. The lower track was primarily confined to the newcomers, the children of the newcomers, and newcomers primarily African American and Puerto Rican. The Asian and the middle class whites, regardless of how dumb they might be, were in the upper tracks, and they were isolated. And the people who were in the lower tracks were angry. And they began to form in Woodlawn and on the west side gangs. Now I had Jeff Ford, some of you may have heard of Jeff Ford, and the Blackstone Rangers. I had them as students. I demanded I could handle them, because I was a street hooter. I hung out with the hoops, so I knew how to handle them, and they liked me. But they wanted to put them out of Hyde Park High School at that time. Hyde Park High School at that time was one of the most successful public high schools in the country. The college professors from University of Chicago had their children at the university, at the Hyde Park in the upper track. And they put Jeff Ford, who was a smart guy. He just was not educated. He was smart and he was a natural leader. I can handle that guy. I can handle him. He said, "Oh, Mr. Black, they want to put us out. They want to put us out." I said, "You got to stay, because they have what you need." But I had an invitation to go to Washington, D.C. when Thurgood Marshall was being installed as the first black Supreme Court justice. I had an invitation to be there, and I couldn't turn that. When I returned, after that weekend, they had put Jeff Ford and all those guys out. I went around the corner to the Blackstone pool hall where they hung out. They, come on, let's go back. Oh, Mr. Black, they don't want us there. We're going to take over the whole thing. And that meant they were going to terrorize the middle class blacks as well as change the neighborhood. And they did that on the south side, on the west side, and public housing was one of the organizing places for the gangs, and then drugs began to come into the community in quantities. Now, then with us privileged people, separated from our less fortunate brothers and sisters, we no longer could control the community as we had done earlier, where we had grown up. We were now unable to control the economics. We didn't need to, or the political. We couldn't make the demands that we had made when we were concentrated. And our less fortunate brothers and sisters coming in the second migration, with their less ability to train, to get educated, and the schools beginning to, many people began to leave the south side and the west side and move to the suburbs or to other places. Now, I wish we had time for some comments or questions, but when we hear the story of Muhammad Ali, it encompasses the struggle way before. In the South, people like Rosa Parks and E.D. Nixon and Fannie Lou Hamer were working to break the barriers of segregation in the South without having to leave the South. People like this old man, seeing Dr. King, who in the Army, that's another story, the segregation. When I had on my soldier suit in the Army, my soldier suit, getting ready to go overseas, and I get on a bus, the bus driver would tell me, you got to go to the back of the bus. I have on my white boy, a girl, can get on the bus, sit where they wanted to sit, and one time, when I wasn't thinking, white boy in his civilian clothes I was sitting down I was the first person on the bus, and I just sat down like I did in Chicago, and the bus driver told the bus driver he's sitting in the wrong place. The bus driver came to me and said, you're sitting in the wrong place. I said, what? As if I didn't know why. You shouldn't be sitting, you should be. I said, what? Why did you tell me that when I got on? It didn't matter then. Why does it matter, man? Do you mean to tell me I'm going overseas and give my life so he can tell me where to send it on the bus? Hell no. That was the way I felt, and that's what I said. Fortunately, we got close to the train, and I knew how to sing out of it. When you look at people like Jackie Robinson, who broke the barriers, you have a part of the history. He was an officer, and he refused to go to the back of the bus in Little Rock, Arkansas. He was arrested and given a dishonorable discharge. That only changed when he became a member of the Brooklyn Dodgers. That only changed. And he could fight. He was a boxer also. So when we look at Muhammad Ali, we're looking at a history that has been created by people way earlier. Jack Johnson. Oh, Jack Johnson. He was the first black heavyweight champion. And his family used it, and he was treated. He married a white lady, beautiful white lady, and I know because they used to come get the paper. My brother and I had a paper stand at 50th and what was then Grand Boulevard, now in Martin Luther King Drive. He was a nice guy. But when he had the audacity to marry this white lady, and she had the audacity to marry him, they created a new law that if he had not left Texas, he would have been in prison. And he left. There were many others. There was Joe Louis. He fought. And I remember he was beat by Mark Schmeling in 1935. But that changed later. Mark Schmeling was white, German. And then they kept, the Jewish community kept that from being a championship. And then Joe Louis fought Jim Braddock, 1937. I remember I was standing because Benny Goodman had incorporated two blacks into his band called the Benny Goodman Trio. And so we were standing outside the 8th Regiment Armory at 35th and Jai when Benny Goodman was playing. And We got the word. Joe Louis and Jim Braddock were fighting in what we now call, well, it was Comiskey Park at that time. We got the word while this band was playing that Joe Louis had won that heavyweight battle. And we sung with each other. Joe Louis knocked Jim Braddock down. Jim Braddock got right up again. Joe Louis knocked him down again. It makes no difference what you say. The champion is an end. That was, for that time, people feeling that Joe Louis could not beat old Jack Johnson. And on we go with that history. But the optimism is the thing that I want all of you, black, white, brown, to carry with it. That the door is going to open. Be ready to walk in. And the best examples are people like Oscar De Priest, Carol Moseley Braun, who became the first black woman U.S. Senator. And then look way up. And the first black to become the President of the United States. We put him in. He didn't just walk in. He was ready when the door was open. Be prepared. The door is going to open. And as Duke Ellington said in his sacred concert, I believe that God puts sun and moon up in the sky. I believe that dark clouds are clouds just passing by. Lord, dear Lord above, God Almighty, God of love, please look down and see our people through. Keep the faith, folks. We're going to be all right. Thank you. Sorry I talked so long.
So much. Don't worry. Well, history sitting right here amongst us. Yes. Thank you so very much. Now, he told us his birth date. So how old is he, one of the young people?
98.
He'll be 98 in December, right? He'll be 98 in December.
December 7th.
December 7th.
Famous day in history. December 7th. And December 7th, an infamous day, December 7th, 1941, an infamous day in history. At the beginning, Pearl Harbor Day. I was in my favorite tavern enjoying myself.
Brother Black, he's taught at Burke Elementary School in Chicago. And he went to Burke Elementary School and graduated from DuSable. So these are places that still exist, of course, and he is a product of the Chicago public school system. But if we listened, we could hear the repetition of history. Even as we are looking at the school systems now and who they want to put where and where for certain people are put in the higher echelons and the lower echelons, whether or not they're qualified or not. So we have the opportunity to be history makers where we are. Even if nobody ever knows our name, we can make an impact. So let us clap once again and show Mr. Black how excited we are that he was here. And we at Faith in Place have a couple of things to give to him to say thank you. And I'm going to ask if the executive director of Faith in Place, Reverend Brian Souter, will come. Oh, wait a second.
I just want to say this and put it on your shoulder. As the late Margaret Burroughs, the poet, the founder of DuSable Museum, and she wrote a book and it had the theme, what will your legacy be? What will your legacy be? What will the children, grandchildren, and others after you, what can they brag, what will they be able to brag about? Leave a legacy that pushes other generations forward. And you have a responsibility. You got to eat, you got to sleep, you got to have a responsibility to leave a legacy, a history that other young people have a responsibility to uphold and follow. Too many of our young people don't have that legacy, unfortunately. Therefore, they feel there's no future.
Amen. I hope we're listening. Wise words from a wise man. Mr. Black, we want to present to you the Story Circle Award. And if I can show it to them so they can see it too. You don't have to stand up if you don't want to. It says Migration and Me Program Story Circle Award presented to Mr. Timuel Black Jr. on this, the 11th day of June, 2016, signed by Veronica Kyle, the Chicago Outreach Director, and Reverend Deborah Williams, Program Director. And we're going to get a photo shoot here with our Executive Director, Reverend Brian Souter. He is over Faith and Play.